Good afternoon, and sorry for the echo. I'm Sarah Hanks, the CEO of CrowdCheck, and I and my founders, Brian and Thea Knight, Brian somewhere, would like to welcome you all to our second annual conference on crowdfunding. As you can tell from my accent, I'm from Virginia, Virginia 1.0, and I sound a lot more like Thomas Jefferson than you lot do. But before I came to Virginia, I grew up in England, and I just wanted to say something about one of that country's towering figures who died today. Maggie Thatcher would have loved crowdfunding. Crowdfunding's appeal to entrepreneurialism, engagement, and personal responsibility would have really spoken to her. She would have loved the potential that it presents to small businesses, and she would have been very much in favor of stern measures for any fraudsters who tried to exploit the industry. Now, it's been nearly a year since our first conference, which was held just after the President signed the Jobs Act. Since that time, the Jobs Act hasn't quite created as many jobs for small companies as we had hoped it would, but it has spawned a whole new industry in Jobs Act anniversary editorials, many of which you've probably seen. Now, here's a quote from one of them. The regulator, that is the SEC, has legitimate concerns about fake entrepreneurs and mythical companies taking advantage of unsophisticated investors. Well, no, not quite. And that's why we're here today. I just first want to make it quite clear that it is illegal to set up a fake company, sell shares in it, and run off to Belize, whether you do it on a crowdfunding portal or any other context. And are we all clear on that? We're fine, that's illegal. Not really that bothered about fake companies, actually. I think the problem here is that we aren't defining our terms properly, and that's distorting the conversation. Advocates and opponents of crowdfunding are talking at cross purposes to some extent. The true threat is far more subtle than fake entrepreneurs. It's the flaky entrepreneur and the way that the system deals with him. People who don't set out to commit securities fraud might in some ways pose more threats to the existence of the industry than the people who do set out to do ill. At CrowdCheck, we pay a lot of attention to how crowdfunders communicate and tell people what they're doing. Securities crowdfunding isn't legal yet, of course, but reward and product crowdfunding is. So we look at how people promote their projects on the many donation and reward sites. And every day, every single day, we see people make statements that if they had made them in the context of the securities industry, those statements would be fraud. Every day, someone makes a statement with respect to their product, or their process, or their abilities to carry out that process that is either recklessly optimistic, based on nothing more than hope, or sometimes just downright false. Now, that might not matter so much when all that's at stake is a t-shirt, or a CD, or a reception with the artist. It gets a bit more serious when it's a prototype of the product that you've spent a bit more money on. It gets super serious when all that is, when you're talking about securities crowdfunding, because a reckless statement could amount to fraud. And that's the challenge of securities crowdfunding. You're bringing together inexperienced entrepreneurs who don't know what they can and they can't say, and you're connecting them with inexperienced investors who aren't clear about the distinction between fraud and failure. If you put these two together, the opportunities for chaos are endless. You can see the optimistic founders of small companies getting into trouble because they don't communicate what they're doing properly. And you can see investors alleging that they've been taken advantage of and saying they've been defrauded, even when they haven't, because they didn't really understand what they were getting into, and they had different expectations of the process. And you can see the whole crowdfunding industry getting a bad rap because of those misunderstandings. And yet, on the other side, the potential for crowdfunding is so extensive. You've got a new class of investors, people who are turned off by big business, disgusted with the banks, disillusioned by the established capital markets, and not driven purely by economic considerations. And these are the people who want to give ideas and entrepreneurs that they believe in a chance to thrive and grow. So that's a challenge. How do you build a system? A system that lets you establish transparency and make sure investor and entrepreneur are on the same page. And how do you do that without building something that's so complex and costly that it doesn't work for small deals? And it doesn't work for inexperienced participants because they don't understand what they're supposed to be doing. So those are the topics that we're going to be discussing on our two panels. On this panel, we'll be talking about what we're worried about. What is fraud in the securities context? What kind of fraud might we see? Is fraud, in fact, the biggest threat? The second panel looks at how a regulatory system can be created that addresses the threat without crushing the industry. And then Senator Warner will give his keynote address. We will be hosting drinks immediately afterwards, and we hope that you will stay and chat with us afterwards. And I think drinks are over there. We'll be showing you the appropriate place. And we hope you will stay and chat, because we've got some folks in the audience, I'm looking around now, who I know very well, who are just as knowledgeable as some of the people on the panel today. We're truly honored to have all of you here. We are truly honored to have the panelists here. And now Thea is going to just do a quick introduction of our first panel. Thank you.